Master Chief Sarah Chen had been called many things during her 12 years in the Navy. Most of them weren't compliments. At 34 years old, she was one of only a handful of women who had made it through the grueling SEAL sniper training program. But in the minds of many at Naval Base Coronado, that achievement meant nothing. "Hey Chen, make sure you don't chip a nail out there today." The voice belonged to Lieutenant Marcus Reeves, a cocky operator who had joined the SEALs 3 years after Sarah, but somehow felt entitled to treat her like a recruit. He stood near the armory door with 2 other teammates, all of them grinning like schoolboys who had just discovered dirty jokes. Sarah didn't break stride as she walked past them, her rifle case slung over her shoulder. "Make sure you don't trip over your ego, Reeves. Heard it's gotten pretty big lately." The other men laughed, but Reeves's smile faded. He didn't like being challenged, especially not by a woman he considered out of place in his world. Commander James Hutchins, the SEAL team leader, stepped out of his office just as Sarah reached the briefing room. He was a barrel-chested man in his late 40s with gray hair and cold blue eyes that had seen too many battles. He looked at Sarah with the same expression he might give a piece of equipment that had been delivered to the wrong address. "Chen, you're sitting this one out," he said flatly. Sarah stopped mid-step. "Sir, I'm the primary sniper for this operation. We've been planning it for 3 weeks." "Plans change," Hutchins replied, not meeting her eyes. "Reeves will take the shot. You'll stay back at base and coordinate communications." The words hit Sarah like a slap. Communications. That was a desk job, a babysitting role they gave to people who couldn't handle the real work. She had logged more confirmed kills than anyone on the team, had trained for months for this specific mission, and now she was being benched. "Commander, with all due respect." "My decision is final, Master Chief." Hutchins turned his back on her and walked into the briefing room, where the rest of the team was already gathering. Sarah stood in the hallway, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. Through the open door, she could hear Reeves laughing about something. She wanted to march in there and demand an explanation. She wanted to throw her credentials in Hutchins's face. But she had learned long ago that anger got you nowhere in the military. Anger just proved to men like Hutchins that you were too emotional for the job. Instead, she turned and walked back down the hallway, her boots echoing against the linoleum floor. She had nowhere to go except the small office she shared with the intelligence team. It was a cramped space with flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of stale coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. Lieutenant Jessica Park, one of the intelligence analysts, looked up from her computer as Sarah entered. Jessica was in her late 20s, Korean-American like Sarah, and one of the few people on base who treated her like a fellow professional instead of an unwanted guest. "Hey, I thought you'd be in the briefing," Jessica said. Then she saw Sarah's face. "What happened?" Sarah dropped her rifle case on the floor and slumped into a chair. "Hutchins pulled me from the op, gave my position to Reeves." Jessica's eyes widened. "What, but you're the best shooter they have. Everyone knows that." "Everyone except the people who matter." Sarah rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building behind her eyes. "He didn't even give me a reason, just said plans change." "That's such garbage," Jessica muttered. She rolled her chair closer to Sarah's desk. "You know what this is about, right? It's because of what happened in Afghanistan." Sarah's stomach tightened. She had hoped people had forgotten about Afghanistan, or at least stopped talking about it. 2 years ago, Sarah had been part of a joint operation in the mountains outside Kandahar. She had taken a shot that saved 3 team members from an ambush, but in the chaos that followed, one of the insurgents had escaped. That insurgent had later been linked to an attack on a NATO convoy. The official report had cleared Sarah of any wrongdoing. The unofficial whispers blamed her for every casualty that came after. "That was 2 years ago," Sarah said quietly. "And I was cleared, the investigation found." "I know what it found," Jessica interrupted gently. "But guys like Hutchins don't care about official reports. They care about finding reasons to keep women out of their club." Sarah knew Jessica was right. She had known it the moment she decided to pursue the SEALs. The military had opened combat roles to women, but opening a door didn't mean the people inside wanted you to walk through it. Every day was a fight to prove she belonged. Every day was a test she had to pass, while men like Reeves were given the benefit of the doubt. "So what are you going to do?" Jessica asked. Sarah looked at her friend for a long moment. "My job, whatever they'll let me do." But even as she said the words, something burned in her chest. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was something colder, something more dangerous. It was determination. The mission briefing lasted 2 hours. Sarah wasn't invited, but Jessica had access to the mission files and quietly shared the details with her afterward. The target was a high-value individual named Karim Nazari, an arms dealer who had been supplying weapons to terrorist cells across the Middle East. Intelligence had tracked him to a compound in Raqqa, Syria. The plan was a quick in-and-out operation. Get close, eliminate the target, extract before anyone knew they were there. It should have been straightforward. It should have been Sarah's shot. Instead, she spent the next 3 days coordinating radio communications from a desk 4,000 miles away. She listened to the team banter and joke as they flew to the staging area. She heard Reeves boasting about how clean his shot would be. She heard Hutchins praising him for stepping up to handle the big moment. And then she heard everything go wrong. The team had infiltrated the compound under cover of darkness. They had reached the position where Sarah would have set up her shot, a rooftop overlooking the target building. But when the moment came for Reeves to take Nazari out, he hesitated. Through the radio chatter, Sarah could hear the tension in his voice. "I don't have a clean line," Reeves reported. "Target is behind a concrete wall. I can see his heat signature, but—" "Can you make the shot or not?" Hutchins demanded. There was a long pause, too long. In that silence, Sarah knew exactly what was happening. Reeves didn't have the skill for this shot. She had trained for scenarios like this. She had made impossible shots through barriers, calculated angles, and penetration depths in her sleep. But Reeves hadn't put in those hours. He had relied on natural talent and bravado, and now he was choking. "Negative," Reeves finally said. "I can't guarantee the kill. Recommend we abort and try again when we have a better angle." Sarah closed her eyes. Aborting meant losing Nazari. Intelligence had intercepted communications suggesting he was planning to move locations within 48 hours. This was their only chance. "Copy that," Hutchins said over the radio. "All units fall back. We're scrubbing the mission." Sarah's hands curled into fists on her desk. She wanted to scream into the radio. She wanted to tell Hutchins that she could have made that shot. She wanted to be anywhere but sitting in this small office, listening to her team retreat from a mission that should have been hers. But she said nothing. She sat in silence as the team extracted. She sat in silence as they flew back to base. And she sat in silence the next day when Hutchins gathered everyone for a debrief and didn't mention Sarah's name once. It was Jessica who finally broke through the quiet rage that had been building inside Sarah. "They're covering it up," Jessica said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Look at the official report. It says the mission was scrubbed due to unforeseen complications with the target location." No mention of Reeves failing to make the shot. No acknowledgement that this could have gone differently. Sarah opened the folder and scanned the pages. Jessica was right. The report made it sound like the mission had been impossible from the start. It protected Reeves, it protected Hutchins, it protected everyone except the truth. "What do you want me to do with this?" Sarah asked quietly. Jessica leaned forward, her voice urgent. "I want you to stop letting them push you around. You're the best sniper on this base, maybe the best in the entire Navy. And they're wasting you because they're too scared or too proud to admit that a woman can do the job better than their golden boys." Sarah looked at her friend, then back down at the report. She thought about all the years she had spent trying to fit in, all the insults she had swallowed, all the moments she had held her tongue when she wanted to fight back. She thought about Karim Nazari, who was still alive because Reeves couldn't make the shot she could have made with her eyes closed. And she thought about what Jessica had asked her 3 days ago. "What are you going to do?" Sarah closed the folder and stood up. When she spoke, her voice was steady and cold. "I'm going to make sure they never bench me again." 3 weeks passed like a slow-burning fuse. Sarah went through the motions of her daily routine, physical training at dawn, weapons maintenance, briefings she was barely included in. But something had changed inside her. She no longer tried to prove herself to men like Hutchins and Reeves. Instead, she focused on being so undeniably skilled that they would have no choice but to use her. Every morning before sunrise, she was at the shooting range. She practiced shots that most snipers would never attempt. Shots through barriers, shots at extreme angles, shots in high wind that required calculations so complex she had to work them out on paper before pulling the trigger. She studied ballistics reports until her eyes burned. She ran scenarios in her head while she ate, while she showered, while she lay awake at night staring at the ceiling. Lieutenant Park noticed the change. "You're pushing yourself too hard." Jessica said one evening, finding Sarah alone at the range long after everyone else had gone home. "You've been out here for 6 hours." 6 hours and 42 minutes, Sarah corrected, not looking up from her rifle. She adjusted the scope and fired again. The target, 800 yards downrange, showed a perfect hit through a small gap in a concrete barrier. "And I'll stay until I can do it in the dark." Jessica sighed but didn't argue. She knew that look in Sarah's eyes. She had seen it before in people who had been pushed too far and decided to push back. What Jessica didn't know was that Sarah had been doing more than just practicing. She had been building relationships with people who had been overlooked and underestimated, just like her. There was Sergeant Tommy Valdez, a logistics coordinator who everyone ignored until they needed something moved quickly. There was Petty Officer Rachel Martinez, an intelligence analyst who had been passed over for promotion 3 times because she wasn't aggressive enough. And there was Chief Warrant Officer David Kim, a drone operator who had been sidelined after a mission had gone wrong under someone else's command. They were the invisible people, the ones who kept the machine running while men like Reeves and Hutchins took the credit. And Sarah had quietly shown them that she saw them, that she valued them, that she remembered their names and asked about their families and listened when they talked. She was building something. She just didn't know she would need it so soon. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late August. Sarah was in the gym, running through her 3rd set of pull-ups, when her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Commander Hutchins. All senior team members were to report to the briefing room immediately. Sarah's heart rate picked up, but not from the exercise. Urgent briefings usually meant one thing: they had found a target. When she entered the briefing room, she found the usual suspects already there. Hutchins stood at the front near a large screen. Reeves sat in the front row, looking confident as always. The other team members were scattered around the room, some drinking coffee, some checking their phones. Hutchins barely glanced at Sarah as she took a seat in the back row. That was fine. She had learned to read situations from the shadows. "Listen up," Hutchins began, his voice cutting through the low conversations. "We've got new intelligence on Karim Nazari." The room went quiet. Everyone remembered Nazari. Everyone remembered the failed mission. "Nazari has been tracked to a new location in northern Syria near the Turkish border," Hutchins continued. A satellite image appeared on the screen, showing a small compound surrounded by rough terrain. "This is a temporary safe house he's using while he negotiates a major arms deal. Intelligence suggests he'll only be there for 72 hours, starting tomorrow." Another image appeared, a floor plan of the compound. Sarah studied it carefully, her mind already calculating angles and distances. "This is a harder target than the last one," Hutchins admitted. "The compound has reinforced walls, limited sight lines, and heavy security, but Command has made it clear this is a priority target. Nazari has been linked to 3 major attacks in the past 6 months. We need to take him out." Reeves raised his hand. "What's the approach, sir?" Hutchins zoomed in on the floor plan. "The only viable position for a shot is from this ridge, approximately 1,200 yards from the target building. The problem is Nazari rarely exposes himself. When he's inside, he stays in this room here." He pointed to a central chamber. "Concrete walls on all sides, 8 inches thick, reinforced with rebar." Sarah's pulse quickened. She knew exactly what that meant. This wasn't just a difficult shot. This was an impossible shot by conventional standards. You couldn't just fire a standard round through 8 inches of reinforced concrete and expect it to kill a target on the other side. The bullet would tumble, fragment, lose velocity. Even if it penetrated the wall, it would be useless. But Sarah had trained for exactly this scenario. She had studied penetrating ammunition, had practiced calculating the angles needed to maintain bullet stability through barriers. She had made shots that other snipers didn't even believe were possible. "So what's the plan?" another team member asked. "Wait for him to come outside." "That's the problem," Hutchins said. "Intelligence says he almost never leaves that central room when he's at the compound. He has his meetings there, eats there, sleeps there. He's paranoid about drone strikes and long-range attacks. The only time he might expose himself is when he arrives or departs, and we can't guarantee our timing will line up with those windows." The room fell silent. Sarah could see the wheels turning in everyone's heads. They were all thinking the same thing. This mission was even riskier than the last one. Reeves cleared his throat. "Sir, if I may, I've been practicing long-range shots through barriers. I think I can make it work." Sarah almost laughed out loud. She had seen Reeves at the range. He practiced the same standard scenarios everyone did. He had never pushed himself beyond the comfortable, proven techniques. He was a good shooter, but he wasn't a great one, and this shot required greatness. Hutchins nodded slowly. Reeves, I appreciate your confidence, but I need to be realistic about our capabilities here. This shot. He paused, and for the first time, Sarah saw doubt flicker across his face. This shot might be beyond what we can do. Then we wait for a better opportunity, one of the other team members suggested. Track him to another location. There might not be another location, a new voice said. Everyone turned. The speaker was Captain Patricia Morrison, a senior intelligence officer who had just entered the room. She was a tall African-American woman in her 50s with silver hair and an air of authority that made even Hutchins straighten his posture. Captain, Hutchins said, surprised, I didn't know you were joining us. I wasn't planning to, Morrison replied. But when I heard about this mission, I thought I should provide some context that isn't in the official briefing. She walked to the front of the room and pulled up a new image on the screen. It showed a series of intercepted communications. Nazari isn't just negotiating an arms deal. He's brokering the sale of advanced anti-aircraft systems to a terrorist cell planning an attack on a commercial airliner. If this deal goes through, hundreds of civilians will die. The room got even quieter. This wasn't just about taking out a bad guy anymore. This was about preventing a massacre. Morrison continued, her voice grave. We have 72 hours before Nazari finalizes this deal and disappears again. Command has made it clear, this is our last best chance. If we can't make this shot, a lot of innocent people are going to pay the price. Sarah felt every pair of eyes in the room avoid looking at her. They all knew the truth. They all knew who could make this shot, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Except for Captain Morrison. Commander Hutchins, Morrison said, turning to face him directly. I've reviewed the personnel files for this team. There's one person in this room who has successfully made shots through reinforced barriers at extreme range. One person who has trained specifically for this type of scenario. Hutchins's jaw tightened. Captain, I don't think. Master Chief Sarah Chen, Morrison continued as if he hadn't spoken. 3 confirmed kills through concrete barriers in combat situations. Highest accuracy rating of any sniper currently stationed at Coronado. Holds the record for longest confirmed kill in SEAL training history. She paused. Am I missing something, Commander? Because from where I'm standing, the choice seems obvious. The room was so quiet Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. She sat perfectly still, barely breathing, waiting for Hutchins to respond. She could see the conflict on his face. His pride fighting against his duty, his prejudice fighting against the reality that was staring him down. Finally, Reeves spoke up. With all due respect, Captain, I can make this shot. I've been preparing. Have you ever made a kill shot through 8 inches of reinforced concrete at 1,200 yards? Morrison asked sharply. Reeves hesitated. Well, no, but... Then sit down and be quiet. Morrison's voice was steel wrapped in ice. She turned back to Hutchins. Commander, I'm not here to question your leadership, but I am here to remind you that we're not playing politics right now. We're trying to save lives. So I'm going to ask you one more time, who's the best person for this shot? Hutchins looked at Morrison for a long moment. Then he looked at Sarah. She met his gaze without flinching. She didn't plead. She didn't argue. She just looked at him and waited. Finally, Hutchins let out a long breath. Master Chief Chen, your primary sniper for this operation. Sarah nodded once, keeping her expression neutral even as relief and vindication flooded through her. Yes, sir. But let me be clear, Hutchins continued, his voice harder now. If you miss this shot, if anything goes wrong, it's on you, understood? Understood, sir, Sarah replied. She understood perfectly. If she succeeded, Hutchins would take the credit. If she failed, she would take the blame. That was how it had always been. But she wasn't going to fail. The briefing continued for another hour, going over every detail of the mission. Sarah listened carefully, memorizing the layout of the compound, the timing of security patrols, the weather forecast for the next 72 hours. But a part of her mind was already at that ridge, 1,200 yards from the target, calculating the shot that everyone said was impossible. When the briefing ended, people filed out of the room quickly. Most of them avoided looking at Sarah. Reeves brushed past her without a word, his face dark with anger. Only Captain Morrison approached her. Master Chief, Morrison said quietly, Walk with me. They left the building and walked across the base grounds toward the waterfront. It was a clear day, the California sun bright overhead, the Pacific Ocean stretching out blue and endless to the horizon. "You know why I spoke up for you in there?" Morrison said. It wasn't a question. "Because I'm the best choice for the mission," Sarah replied. "That's part of it," Morrison agreed. "But there's more. I've been in the Navy for 30 years. I've seen a lot of talented people get pushed aside because they didn't fit someone's idea of what a sailor should look like. I've seen too many good operators get wasted because commanders were more interested in protecting their egos than completing the mission." She stopped walking and turned to face Sarah. "You're good at what you do, really good, but that's not enough in this world. You also need people who will open doors for you. Consider me one of those people." Sarah felt a tightness in her throat. "Thank you, Captain, I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Morrison said. "But I also need you to understand something. This shot you're about to take, it's not just about killing Nazari. It's about proving that women belong in combat roles. Whether that's fair or not, that's the reality. Every woman who comes after you will be judged by what you do on this mission." The weight of those words settled on Sarah's shoulders. She had always known she was representing more than just herself, but hearing it said so plainly made it feel heavier. "No pressure, right?" Sarah said with a small, tight smile. Morrison smiled back, but her eyes were serious. "All the pressure in the world, Master Chief, but I've seen your record. If anyone can handle it, it's you." They walked back to the base in silence. Sarah's mind was already shifting into mission mode, running through calculations and scenarios. She had 3 days to prepare. 3 days to make sure she was ready for the shot that would define her career. 3 days to prove that the SEAL commander had been wrong to ever doubt her. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in her small quarters, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the briefing over and over. Finally, at 2 in the morning, she gave up and went back to the range. The base was quiet at this hour, most people asleep or working late shifts in operations centers. The shooting range was empty except for the night security guard, who nodded at Sarah as she signed in. He was used to seeing her at odd hours. She set up a practice target at 1,200 yards and placed a concrete barrier in front of it. It wasn't exactly the same as the real thing. The concrete was only 4 inches thick instead of 8, and it wasn't reinforced with rebar, but it was close enough to work with. For the next 3 hours, she practiced. She tried different ammunition types, different angles, different firing positions. She calculated windage and elevation until her head ached. She made shot after shot, adjusting based on what she observed, learning the specific characteristics of how bullets behaved when penetrating concrete at extreme range. By the time the sun started to rise, she had made 17 successful shots through the barrier. She had also learned something important. The standard penetrating ammunition wouldn't work for this mission. She needed something more powerful, something that could maintain velocity and stability through 8 inches of reinforced concrete. She needed to talk to someone who understood ballistics better than anyone else on the base. That someone was Chief Warrant Officer David Kim, the drone operator she had befriended. Before he had joined the Navy, David had been a mechanical engineer specializing in materials science. He understood things about bullet penetration and structural integrity that most people didn't even know were relevant. Sarah found him in the Drone Operations Center, monitoring a flight over the Middle East. "David, I need your help with something," she said. He looked up from his screens and saw the intensity in her eyes. "The Nazari mission." "Yeah, I need to penetrate 8 inches of reinforced concrete at 1,200 yards. Standard penetrating rounds won't cut it. What are my options?" David leaned back in his chair, thinking. 8 inches of reinforced concrete is serious. You're not just dealing with density, you're dealing with rebar that will deflect the round, air pockets that will cause tumbling, all kinds of variables. He pulled up a calculator on his computer. "But there might be a way. Have you heard of tungsten core saboted rounds?" Sarah nodded. "Armor-piercing rounds designed for vehicle penetration, but I've never used them for anti-personnel work." "That's because they're technically not authorized for anti-personnel use under standard rules of engagement," David said carefully. "They're designed to punch through tank armor, not concrete walls. But," he pulled up a series of technical specifications on his screen, "if you could get your hands on some, and if you calculated the trajectory correctly to account for the different ballistics, Theoretically, they should be able to penetrate 8 inches of reinforced concrete and still maintain enough velocity and mass to be lethal on the other side. Theoretically, Sarah repeated. Theoretically, David confirmed. I'd have to run the math to be sure, and you'd have to practice with them to understand how they handle differently from standard rounds, and you'd need someone to sign off on using them for this mission. Sarah thought about that. Captain Morrison had put her neck on the line already. Maybe she would do it again. Can you run the math? Sarah asked. I'll worry about the authorization. David smiled. Give me until tomorrow morning. I'll have everything you need. Sarah left the drone operations center feeling, for the first time in weeks, like she had some control over her situation. She wasn't just reacting to other people's decisions anymore. She was making her own. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. David came through with the calculations, providing Sarah with detailed models of how the tungsten core rounds would behave at extreme range and through concrete barriers. Captain Morrison, after some convincing, managed to get authorization for the specialty ammunition for testing purposes, and Sergeant Valdez, using his logistics connections, located a small supply of the rounds and had them delivered to the base within 24 hours. Sarah spent every available moment practicing with the new ammunition. The rounds handled differently, heavier, with a flatter trajectory but more sensitivity to wind. She had to recalibrate her instincts, learning how these bullets behaved in flight. It was like learning to shoot all over again. But by the time the mission launch day arrived, she had made 37 successful shots through 8-inch concrete barriers at 1,200 yards. She had adjusted for different wind conditions, different temperatures, different angles. She had done everything she could to prepare. Now all she had to do was make the shot when it mattered most. Part 3, the mission. The helicopter ride to the staging area took 4 hours. Sarah sat in silence, her rifle case secured between her knees, her mind running through calculations one last time. The rest of the team was spread throughout the helicopter, Hutchins, Reeves, and 6 other operators. Everyone wore full combat gear, their faces serious and focused. No one talked to Sarah. That was fine. She preferred the silence anyway. They landed at a small forward operating base just across the Syrian border in Turkey. The base was little more than a cluster of temporary buildings surrounded by razor wire, but it had everything they needed: secure communications, mission planning facilities, and access to local intelligence assets. Hutchins gathered everyone for a final briefing. We move out at 2100 hours, insertion by ground vehicle to avoid detection. The route takes us through hostile territory, so stay alert. Chen, you'll set up on this ridge here. He pointed to the map. The rest of the team will establish a perimeter and provide security. If this goes loud, we extract immediately. Questions? No one spoke. All right, Hutchins said. Get some rest. It's going to be a long night. Sarah found a quiet corner of the base and lay down on a cot, but she didn't sleep. She couldn't. Instead, she went over every detail of the shot in her mind. Wind direction, temperature, humidity, the angle of the concrete wall, the position of the target inside the room, every variable that could affect the bullet's path. At 2000 hours, she got up and began her pre-mission routine. She checked her rifle for the 3rd time that day, carefully inspecting every component. She loaded the tungsten core rounds, feeling their unfamiliar weight. She adjusted her scope, making minute corrections based on the local atmospheric conditions. And she thought about Karim Nazari, the man she had never met but whose death would save hundreds of lives. She didn't feel anger toward him. She didn't feel hatred. She just felt a cold, clear sense of purpose. This was her job. This was what she had trained for. This was why she had endured all the insults, all the doubt, all the moments when people told her she didn't belong. This was her moment. At 2100 hours, they loaded into 3 nondescript SUVs and departed the base. The vehicles had no military markings, no identifying features. To anyone watching, they would look like local traders or smugglers, the kind of people who moved through this region all the time. The drive took 90 minutes over rough roads that wound through dark countryside. Sarah sat in the second vehicle, watching the landscape pass by through night vision goggles. This was bandit country, the kind of place where governments held no real power and violence was a daily reality. They passed burned-out buildings and abandoned checkpoints, remnants of a war that had been grinding on for too many years. Finally, they reached the rally point, a small abandoned farm about 2 miles from Nazari's compound. The team dismounted quickly and efficiently, checking weapons and equipment. Hutchins gathered them for one last review. Chen, you've got 40 minutes to get into position. The rest of us will establish the perimeter here and here. He pointed to positions on a map illuminated by a red flashlight. Remember, our window is small. Intelligence says Nazari should be in the compound for the next 6 hours, but after that, all bets are off. If Chen takes the shot and we need to extract Hot, everyone knows the rally points. Sarah nodded and turned to leave, but Hutchins caught her arm. Master Chief, he said quietly so only she could hear. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but right now you're the only one who can make this happen. Don't let the pressure get to you. Sarah met his eyes. She didn't see warmth there or even respect. But she did see something like grudging acknowledgement. It wasn't much, but it was something. I won't, sir, she said simply. She set off toward the ridge, moving quickly through the darkness. She had mapped out this route during planning, memorizing every landmark, every potential hazard. Behind her, she could hear the rest of the team moving into their positions, but those sounds quickly faded as she put distance between herself and the rally point. The ridge was a natural rock formation that overlooked the valley where Nazari's compound sat. It provided excellent cover and a clear line of sight to the target building. The climb took 25 minutes, moving carefully to avoid dislodging rocks that might give away her position. When she reached the top, Sarah found the perfect spot, a natural cleft in the rocks that would hide her from observation while giving her the angle she needed. She set up her rifle, extending the bipod and settling into a prone position. Then she pulled out her rangefinder and began taking measurements. Distance to target, 1,237 yards, slightly farther than she had trained for, but within acceptable parameters. Wind speed, 8 miles per hour, gusting to 12. Coming from the northwest, she would need to adjust her aim accordingly. Temperature, 63 degrees Fahrenheit, lower than the daytime temperature she had trained in, which meant the bullet would travel slightly faster. Humidity, 32%, dry air, less drag on the bullet. She made calculations in her head, adjusting for all these factors. Then she looked through her scope and found the target building. It was a squat, ugly structure made of concrete blocks with a flat roof. Security guards patrolled the perimeter, 4 that she could see, probably more inside. Lights burned in several windows, but the central room where Nazari was supposed to be was dark. Sarah keyed her radio. This is Shadow, in position. I have eyes on target building. Copy, Shadow, Hutchins replied. Intelligence confirms target is inside. Wait for the shot. Sarah settled in to wait. This was the hardest part of being a sniper, the waiting. Some shots came together in seconds. Others took hours. You had to be patient. You had to be comfortable with discomfort. You had to let your body become part of the landscape, breathing slowly, staying absolutely still. An hour passed, then 2. Sarah's legs began to ache from maintaining the same position, but she didn't move. She had trained herself to ignore physical discomfort. Pain was just information, and information could be set aside. Through her scope, she watched the compound. Guards changed positions. Lights turned on and off in various rooms. A vehicle arrived and departed, normal activity for a safe house. Nothing that indicated Nazari was preparing to leave. But he also wasn't showing himself. Sarah's radio crackled. Shadow, this is command. Intelligence intercept suggests target is on the move. You may have less than an hour. Copy that, Sarah replied. Her heart rate picked up slightly, but her hands remained steady on the rifle. 45 minutes later, lights came on in the central room. Sarah tensed, her finger moving to rest lightly on the trigger. Through the walls, she could see the faint glow, but nothing more. The concrete was too thick to see through with normal optics. But she didn't need to see Nazari. She had something better. Shadow, this is Overwatch. The voice belonged to David Kim, who was monitoring the area with a thermal imaging drone from the operations center back at the base. I have thermal signature of 2 individuals in the central room. Based on movement patterns and body size, I'm identifying the larger signature as the target. Stand by for coordinates. Sarah listened as David provided precise coordinates for Nazari's position within the room. She adjusted her aim, calculating the angle she would need to hit him through the concrete wall. The math was complex, but she had done it so many times in practice that it felt almost automatic now. Point of aim, 3 feet 7 inches left of the center window. 2 feet 2 inches above the foundation line. elevation adjustment for distance and angle, windage correction for the crosswind, allowance for the bullet's deflection as it passed through the concrete and rebar. She made the final adjustments to her scope and settled her crosshairs on the exact spot she needed to hit. The wall looked solid and impenetrable. To anyone else, shooting through it would seem impossible. But Sarah had spent her entire career doing things people said were impossible. "Shadow, you are cleared hot," Hutchins said over the radio. "Take the shot when ready." Sarah took a slow breath. Her heartbeat slowed. The world narrowed to just her, the rifle, and the target. All the noise in her head, all the doubts, all the anger, all the memories of being told she wasn't good enough fell away. There was only this moment, only this shot. She exhaled slowly, letting her body relax. In the space between heartbeats, when her body was perfectly still, she squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The report echoed across the valley, sharp and loud. Through her scope, she saw the bullet impact exactly where she had aimed, a small puff of concrete dust marking the entry point. For a moment, nothing happened. The compound looked the same as it had a second before. The guards continued their patrols. The lights stayed on. Then David's voice came through the radio, and Sarah heard something in it she had never heard before. Awe. "Confirmed, target is down. I repeat, target is down." That was a confirmed kill through the wall. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Copy, target eliminated." "All units exfil now," Hutchins ordered. "Shadow, get down from that ridge and meet us at Rally Point Alpha. We're leaving." Sarah quickly broke down her position, packing her rifle and equipment with practiced efficiency. But even as she worked, part of her mind was still on that shot. She had done it. She had made a shot that most people would have said was impossible. She had proven she belonged. The extraction went smoothly. They were back in the vehicles and heading for the border within 20 minutes of the shot. The compound behind them erupted into chaos as Nazari's guards realized what had happened, but by then, the team was long gone. During the drive back to the base, no one spoke much. The adrenaline of the mission was wearing off, replaced by the exhausted relief that came after a successful operation. Sarah sat in silence, her rifle case beside her, feeling the weight of what she had accomplished slowly settling on her shoulders. But when they arrived back at the forward operating base and dismounted from the vehicles, something unexpected happened. Reeves approached her. He looked uncomfortable, his jaw working as if he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. Finally, he spoke. "That was a hell of a shot, Chen." Sarah looked at him, surprised. It wasn't an apology for how he had treated her, it wasn't even close. But it was an acknowledgement. From Reeves, that was something. "Thanks," she said simply. The rest of the team was more effusive. One by one, they came up to congratulate her, to shake her hand, to tell her that shot would be talked about for years. Even Hutchins, though his praise was measured and professional, told her she had done good work. But the person Sarah really wanted to talk to was Captain Morrison. She found the captain in the communications center, reviewing the mission reports. Morrison looked up as Sarah entered and smiled. "Master Chief, I heard the mission was a success." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied. "Target eliminated." Morrison nodded. "I also heard that you made a shot our ballistics experts said had less than a 20% chance of success." Sarah almost smiled. "I guess I beat the odds." "You did more than that," Morrison said seriously. "You proved something important today, not just to the men on your team, but to everyone watching. You proved that skill matters more than gender, that preparation matters more than prejudice." She stood up and extended her hand. "Well done, Master Chief, you should be proud." Sarah shook the captain's hand, feeling a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Not the arrogant, boastful pride she saw in men like Reeves, but the quiet pride that came from knowing you had done something difficult and done it well. "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah said, "for everything." The flight back to Coronado took most of the next day. Sarah spent it sleeping fitfully in the back of a transport plane, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion she had been holding at bay. When they landed back in California, she went straight to her quarters and collapsed on her bed, not even bothering to take off her boots. She woke up 12 hours later to find a message on her phone from Commander Hutchins. It said simply, "Debrief at 900 tomorrow, dress uniform." Dress uniform? That was unusual for a mission debrief. Those were normally casual affairs where the team went over what had worked and what hadn't, making notes for future operations. But when Sarah arrived at the briefing room the next morning in her crisp dress whites, she understood why. The room was full of senior officers, not just from the SEAL teams, but from Naval Special Warfare Command. People whose names she recognized from news articles and commendation ceremonies. And standing at the front of the room was a rear admiral she had never met before. Hutchins was there too, looking uncomfortable in his own dress uniform. When he saw Sarah, he gestured for her to come to the front of the room. "Master Chief Sarah Chen," the rear admiral began, his voice formal and carrying. "On behalf of Naval Special Warfare Command, I want to commend you for your exceptional performance during Operation Righteous Thunder. Your shot, made under extreme conditions and against a target deemed nearly impossible to eliminate, resulted in the successful termination of a high-value individual responsible for multiple terrorist attacks. Your actions directly prevented a planned attack on civilian aircraft that could have resulted in hundreds of casualties." He picked up a small case from the table beside him and opened it. Inside was a medal, the Navy Cross, one of the highest awards for valor in combat. "For extraordinary heroism and distinguished service," the Admiral continued, "I am honored to present you with the Navy Cross." Sarah stood at attention as the Admiral pinned the medal to her uniform. The room erupted in applause. She saw Captain Morrison in the back, beaming with pride. She saw Jessica Park wiping tears from her eyes. She even saw some of her teammates clapping with genuine enthusiasm. But as Sarah looked out at all those faces, she felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not vindication, just a quiet sense of completion. She had done what she set out to do. She had proven she belonged. And now, finally, people were seeing her for who she really was. The medal ceremony should have been the end of the story. Sarah Chen, the underestimated female sniper, had proven herself beyond any doubt. She had made an impossible shot, saved countless lives, and earned the respect of her peers. It should have been her happy ending. But real life doesn't work that way. The morning after the ceremony, Sarah woke up to find her face plastered across news websites. Someone had leaked the story to the press, and suddenly she wasn't just a SEAL operator anymore. She was the woman who made the impossible shot. She was a symbol, a talking point in debates about women in combat roles, a hero to some and a threat to others. Her phone buzzed constantly with interview requests, speaking invitations, and messages from journalists wanting to tell her story. The Navy's Public Affairs Office called her 3 times before noon, asking if she would be willing to participate in a recruiting video. Everyone wanted a piece of her. Everyone except the people she actually worked with. When Sarah walked into the SEAL Team Operations Center the next day, the atmosphere had changed. The congratulations from yesterday felt hollow now, replaced by something colder. People who had shaken her hand after the mission now avoided making eye contact. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. She could feel the judgment in the air, thick and uncomfortable. It was Sergeant Valdez who finally explained it to her. They were in the equipment room where Sarah had gone to return some gear. Tommy was organizing supplies, but he stopped when he saw her. "You feeling all right?" he asked carefully. "Why wouldn't I be?" Sarah replied, though she knew exactly what he meant. Tommy glanced at the door to make sure they were alone. "People are talking," he said quietly. "Saying you're getting special treatment because you're a woman, saying the Navy is using you for publicity, saying the medal was about politics, not performance." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. "That's garbage. I earned that medal." "I know you did," Tommy said quickly. "Anyone who knows anything knows you did, but that's not what people are saying, especially," he hesitated. "Especially who?" Sarah pressed. Tommy looked uncomfortable. "Especially Reeves and his crew. They're spreading it around that you only got selected for the mission because of pressure from higher-ups, that any of them could have made that shot if they'd been given the chance." Sarah wanted to laugh, but the sound that came out was bitter. "Reeves couldn't make the shot the first time we had a chance at Nazari. That's why I was on the mission." "You know that, I know that, but facts don't matter when people already have their minds made up." Tommy shook his head. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I thought things would get better after the mission. I didn't think they'd get worse." Neither had Sarah, but she was learning a hard truth. Success didn't end prejudice. Sometimes it just made people find new ways to dismiss you. The situation came to a head 3 days later during a routine team training exercise. The SEALs were running drills on a close-quarters combat course, practicing room clearing and target identification. Sarah was partnered with Reeves for the exercise, which should have been straightforward. They had done these drills 100 times. But this time, something was different. As they moved through the course, Reeves kept positioning himself in ways that blocked Sarah's sight lines. He would move when he should hold position, creating dangerous gaps in their coverage. It was subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice, but Sarah recognized it immediately. He was sabotaging the exercise. When they finished the run, their time was the worst of the day. The instructor, a grizzled master chief named Dawson, was not pleased. "What happened out there?" Dawson demanded. "You two look like rookies who just met yesterday." "Sorry, Master Chief," Reeves said quickly. "I think we were just out of sync. Maybe Chen was distracted by all her media attention." It was a low blow, and everyone there knew it. Several of the other operators shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up to defend Sarah. She could have let it go. She could have taken the insult and moved on, the way she had been doing for years. But something inside her had changed. The woman who had made the impossible shot through a concrete wall wasn't going to be pushed around anymore. "Actually, Master Chief," Sarah said calmly, "I think the problem was that Lieutenant Reeves kept blocking my sight lines and moving out of position. If you review the video footage, you'll see what I mean." Reeves's face went red. "That's a lie. I followed procedure exactly." "Then let's watch the tape," Sarah replied evenly. Dawson looked between them, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. "All right, everyone to the review room. Let's see what actually happened." They crowded into the small video review room, where every training exercise was recorded from multiple angles. Dawson pulled up the footage, and they watched in silence. The evidence was clear. At 3 separate points in the exercise, Reeves had moved in ways that blocked Sarah's position. He had failed to hold at designated points, creating gaps in their coverage. And in one particularly dangerous moment, he had stepped directly into Sarah's line of fire while she was clearing a room, forcing her to hold her shot. When the video ended, the room was silent. Reeves looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Lieutenant Reeves," Dawson said, his voice hard, "my office, now." As Reeves left the room, Sarah could feel the eyes of every other operator on her. Some looked sympathetic. Some looked angry, though whether they were angry at Reeves or at her, she couldn't tell. None of them said anything. That was when Sarah realized the truth. Making the impossible shot hadn't solved her problems. It had just changed them. She wasn't the outsider trying to prove herself anymore. Now she was the woman who had proven herself, and some people couldn't forgive her for that. That evening, Captain Morrison called Sarah to her office. The captain looked tired, older than she had just a week before. "Have a seat, Master Chief," Morrison said, gesturing to a chair. Sarah sat, wondering what this was about. Morrison pulled out a folder and laid it on the desk between them. "I've been reviewing some concerning reports," Morrison began. "It seems there have been several incidents over the past few days involving team cohesion issues, training accidents, equipment malfunctions, nothing major but enough to create a pattern." Sarah's stomach tightened. "What kind of pattern?" "The kind that suggests someone is being targeted," Morrison said bluntly. "Your name appears in every single report, either as a witness or as someone affected by the incident. Your gear has been accidentally misplaced twice. You've been left off the roster for 2 training exercises, and now today's incident with Reeves." "I can handle it," Sarah said quickly. "I know you can," Morrison replied. "But the question is, should you have to? You just earned the Navy Cross. You should be focusing on the next mission, not fighting your own teammates." Sarah looked down at her hands. "What are you suggesting?" Morrison sighed. "I've been in the Navy long enough to know how this plays out. You've proven yourself, but some people will never accept you. The more successful you become, the more they'll push back. You could spend the rest of your career fighting this battle, or—" "Or what?" Sarah asked. "Or you could transfer to a different team. Or consider moving into a training role where you could help shape the next generation of snipers. Or even take a position in Special Operations Command, where your expertise would be valued and you wouldn't have to deal with this day-to-day garbage." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. "You're telling me to quit." "I'm telling you that you have options," Morrison corrected. "And that sometimes the smartest thing a warrior can do is choose which battles are worth fighting." Sarah stood up. With all due respect, Captain, I didn't spend 12 years fighting to get into the SEALs just to walk away, because some people have hurt feelings about a woman doing the job better than they can. Morrison smiled, but it was a sad smile. I thought you'd say that, and part of me is glad, but the other part of me knows how hard this road is going to be. I've walked it myself. Every day is a fight, every success is questioned, every failure is magnified. It wears you down, Sarah, trust me. Then why did you stay? Sarah asked. Because I'm stubborn, Morrison said, and because I believed that if I kept pushing, eventually things would change. Maybe they have. Maybe your generation won't have to fight as hard as mine did. But that's only going to happen if people like you stick around to show everyone what's possible. Sarah nodded slowly. Then I guess I'm sticking around. Good, Morrison said. She pulled out another folder. Because I have a new mission that requires your particular skills, and this time there won't be any question about whether you're the right person for the job. She slid the folder across the desk. Sarah opened it and found herself looking at satellite images of a compound in Yemen, a high-value target, another impossible shot. This one's even harder than Nazari, Morrison said. Longer distance, worse conditions, higher stakes, the kind of shot that only a handful of people in the world could make, and you're one of them. Sarah studied the images, her mind already working through the calculations. When do we leave? That's the spirit, Morrison said. Briefing is tomorrow at 0800, full team, and Sarah, this time there won't be any debate about who's taking the shot. But Sarah barely heard her. She was already thinking about the mission, about the challenge, about proving once again that she belonged. What she didn't know was that this mission would be different from anything she had faced before, and that the real danger wouldn't come from the target. It would come from someone much closer to home. The next morning's briefing was tense from the start. Commander Hutchins stood at the front of the room, his expression even more serious than usual. The full SEAL team was present, including Reeves, who had been officially reprimanded for his conduct during the training exercise. He sat in the back row, his arms crossed, radiating anger. Listen up, Hutchins began. We have a new high-priority target, Ali Hassan al-Bakr. He's a senior commander in al-Qaeda who's been linked to attacks on 3 U.S. embassies. Intelligence has located him at a compound in southern Yemen. Our orders are to eliminate him before he can relocate. The screen behind Hutchins showed aerial photographs of the target compound. It was in a remote mountainous region, surrounded by hostile territory. This is a long-range shot, Hutchins continued. Longer than anything we've attempted before, 1,600 yards with significant elevation change and unpredictable mountain winds. It's going to be extremely difficult. He paused and looked directly at Sarah. Master Chief Chen will be primary sniper. Given her recent success, Command has specifically requested her for this mission. Sarah felt the temperature in the room drop. She could see the looks on people's faces. Some were supportive, some were resigned, and some, like Reeves, looked like they had just swallowed poison. The rest of the team will provide security and overwatch, Hutchins continued, pulling up more details on the screen. We insert by helicopter at 0200, establish position, and wait for the target to expose himself. Intelligence suggests he conducts morning prayers on the compound's roof around 0500. That will be our window. For the next hour, they went over every detail of the mission. The insertion route, the extraction plan, contingencies if things went wrong. Sarah listened carefully, memorizing every detail. This shot would be even more challenging than the one that had killed Nazari. 1,600 yards was at the extreme edge of what was possible with current sniper technology. Add in mountain winds and the stress of a combat environment, and the difficulty multiplied. But Sarah had never backed down from a challenge. She wasn't about to start now. After the briefing, she went to find David Kim to discuss the ballistics. But as she walked through the base, she had the distinct feeling that she was being watched. Not just the normal awareness that came with being in a military environment, but something more specific, more focused. She turned a corner and nearly ran into Reeves. He was standing in the hallway, almost as if he had been waiting for her. Master Chief, he said, his voice cold and formal, can I have a word? Sarah glanced around. The hallway was empty. What do you want, Reeves? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I want you to turn down this mission. Sarah almost laughed. You're joking. I'm dead serious, Reeves said. You've had your moment, you got your medal, you got your headlines. Now it's time to let someone else have a chance. Someone else, Sarah repeated. You mean you? I mean anyone who actually belongs on this team, Reeves shot back. You think you've proven something by making one lucky shot? All you've proven is that the Navy is desperate to push its diversity agenda. Sarah felt her temper rising, but she kept her voice level. That shot wasn't luck, it was skill. Something you clearly don't have, or you would have made it the first time we went after Nazari. Reeves's face flushed red. You think you're so much better than the rest of us? You think that medal makes you special? Let me tell you something, Chen. The only reason you're on this next mission is politics, and everyone knows it. Is that what you really believe? Sarah asked quietly. Or is that just what you tell yourself to feel better about being second best? She saw the moment her words hit home. Reeves's eyes went cold, and for a second, Sarah thought he might actually take a swing at her. But he got control of himself, stepping back. You're making a mistake, he said. This mission is too dangerous. Something could go wrong, and when it does, you'll have no one to blame but yourself. He turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing alone in the hallway. She told herself it was just the wounded pride of a man who couldn't handle being outperformed. But something in Reeves's voice had sounded less like a warning and more like a threat. That evening, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She went over her gear 3 times, checking every component of her rifle, every piece of equipment. Everything was perfect, but the unease remained. She tried to tell herself she was just nervous about the mission. A 1,600-yard shot in mountain conditions was nothing to take lightly. But she had been nervous before missions in the past, and this felt different. This felt like danger, but not the kind that came from the target. She went to find Jessica Park, who was working late in the intelligence center. Her friend looked up as Sarah entered, immediately sensing something was wrong. What happened? Jessica asked. Sarah told her about the confrontation with Reeves. Jessica's expression darkened as she listened. That's more than just hurt pride, Jessica said when Sarah finished. That sounds like someone who's genuinely angry, maybe even dangerous. You think he'd actually try something? Sarah asked. Jessica bit her lip. I don't know, but I do know that men like Reeves don't handle humiliation well. And you've humiliated him twice now, once by taking the shot he couldn't make, and again by calling him out during training. So what do I do? Sarah asked. Request he be removed from the team, that'll just make things worse. I know, Jessica said. She thought for a moment, then pulled up a file on her computer. Let me show you something. This is Reeves's personnel file. I probably shouldn't be accessing this, but... She scrolled through the documents. Look at this. He's been written up 3 times for conflicts with teammates. Each time he was cleared because the other person backed down. But the pattern is there. Sarah leaned over to read the file. Jessica was right. Reeves had a history of aggressive behavior, especially toward people he perceived as threats. And each time he had gotten away with it. You need to be careful, Jessica said seriously. On this mission, you're going to be in a vulnerable position. You'll be focused on the shot. You'll have to trust the people around you to watch your back, if Reeves is part of the security team. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Sarah spent the night thinking about Jessica's warning. But in the end, she reached the same conclusion she always did. She couldn't let fear dictate her choices. She couldn't let people like Reeves drive her away from doing the job she had trained for. If she backed down now, she would spend the rest of her career wondering if she had made the right choice. So when the helicopter lifted off at 0200 the next morning, Sarah was on it. She had her rifle, she had her training, and she had her determination. What she didn't have was any idea that before the sun rose, someone on her own team would try to kill her. The helicopter touched down in a clearing 3 miles from the target compound. The team moved out quickly and quietly, humping their gear through rough mountain terrain in the darkness. Sarah's pack felt heavier than usual. She was carrying her rifle, ammunition, spotting equipment, communications gear, and enough supplies to stay in position for up to 12 hours if needed. Commander Hutchins led them along a goat trail that wound up the mountainside. They moved in single file, each operator maintaining tactical spacing. Sarah was in the middle of the column with Reeves somewhere behind her. She couldn't see him in the darkness, but she could feel his presence like a weight on her shoulders. It took 90 minutes to reach the Overwatch position, a rocky outcrop that gave them a clear view of the valley below and the target compound. Sarah immediately began setting up her hide, creating a small camouflaged position where she could observe and shoot without being seen. Hutchins and 3 other operators established a security perimeter around her position. Reeves and 2 more operators set up a secondary observation post 50 yards away. The plan was for Sarah to take the shot while everyone else provided security and intelligence support. "Shadow, this is command," Sarah heard through her earpiece. It was David Kim, back at the operations center, who would be providing real-time intelligence via satellite and drone feeds. "Target compound is quiet. No movement detected. Estimate target will appear on the roof at approximately 0500 for morning prayers, as predicted." "Copy that," Sarah replied quietly. She checked her watch. 0330. They had 90 minutes to wait. She settled into position behind her rifle and began the methodical process of preparing for the shot. She ranged the distance to the compound multiple times, 1,612 yards. She checked the wind using a portable weather station, 12 miles per hour, gusting to 18, variable direction. She noted the temperature, the humidity, the barometric pressure. Every piece of data mattered. As the sky began to lighten in the east, Sarah made her final calculations. This would be the longest shot of her career. The bullet would be in flight for nearly 3 seconds. In that time, wind could push it off course. The target could move. 1,000 things could go wrong. But Sarah had done the math. She had trained for this. She was ready. At 0445, David's voice came through her earpiece again. "Shadow, thermal imaging shows movement inside the compound. I'm tracking one individual moving toward the roof access. Stand by." Sarah's heart rate picked up slightly, but her hands remained steady on the rifle. This was it. "Shadow, target is ascending to the roof. Confirm you have visual." Sarah looked through her scope. In the growing dawn light, she could see a figure emerging onto the flat roof of the compound. The man wore traditional robes and carried what looked like a prayer rug. He walked to the center of the roof, facing east toward Mecca. "Visual confirmed," Sarah said quietly. "Stand by." She settled her crosshairs on the target, adjusting for all the variables she had calculated. Wind, distance, elevation, the specific ballistics of the tungsten core ammunition. Everything came together in her mind like a complex equation finally solving itself. "You are cleared hot," Hutchins said over the radio. "Take the shot." Sarah took a slow breath. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. In the space between heartbeats, when her body was perfectly still and her mind was perfectly clear, she began to squeeze. And that's when she felt it, a tiny shift in the way her rifle was resting, something so subtle that most people would never notice it. But Sarah had fired thousands of rounds from this rifle. She knew its weight, its balance, the way it sat against her shoulder, and something was wrong. She eased off the trigger and quickly scanned her shooting platform. Everything looked normal. The bipod was firmly planted. The rifle was stable, but the feeling persisted. "Shadow, why are you holding?" Hutchins demanded. "You have a clear shot." Sarah didn't answer. She was too focused on what she had just noticed. There, barely visible beneath her rifle's bipod, a small wire, thin as a hair, running from under her shooting platform toward the rocks behind her. Her blood went cold. She knew what that wire meant. Someone had placed an explosive device underneath her shooting position. Moving very carefully, Sarah eased back from her rifle and whispered into her radio. "Command, we have a problem. There's an IED under my position." The radio exploded with voices. Hutchins demanding details. David trying to get satellite imagery. Other team members reporting no visible threats in the area. But Sarah wasn't listening to any of them. She was following the wire with her eyes, tracing it back through the rocks to its source. And what she found made her heart stop. The wire led to a small backpack partially hidden behind a boulder. She recognized that pack. She had seen it during the helicopter ride. It belonged to Marcus Reeves. "Sarah, what's your status?" Jessica's voice cut through the radio chatter. She must have been monitoring from the intelligence center. "Talk to me." "I need EOD," Sarah said, using the abbreviation for Explosive Ordnance Disposal. "And I need Reeves's position verified, now." There was a pause, then David's voice came back. "According to GPS, Reeves is at the secondary observation post, 50 yards from your position." But Sarah knew better. She had heard stories about IEDs with remote detonators, about operators who had sabotaged their own teammates, about the kind of hatred that could drive a person to murder. She looked through her scope toward the secondary observation post. In the growing daylight, she could see two figures there, but which one was Reeves? "Target is moving," David reported urgently. "He's finishing his prayers. If we don't take this shot in the next 60 seconds, we lose him." Sarah's mind raced. The target was exposed. The shot was perfect. But if she returned to her rifle, if she settled back into position and pulled the trigger, would that be the moment Reeves detonated the explosive beneath her? Or was she wrong? Was she paranoid? Was the IED just a coincidence, something left behind from an old conflict in this region? No, she had seen the pack. She knew it was fresh. Someone on her team had tried to kill her. "Shadow, you need to take this shot," Hutchins ordered. "That's a direct order." Sarah looked at her rifle, then at the target through her scope. Ali Hassan al-Bakr was standing on that roof, planning attacks that would kill innocent people. This was why she had become a SEAL. This was her job. But if she took the shot from this position, she might die. In that moment, everything crystallized for Sarah. She could follow orders and potentially die, or she could trust her instincts and potentially let a terrorist escape. She chose a third option. Moving quickly, she grabbed her rifle and crawled backward, away from the IED. She heard Hutchins shouting over the radio, demanding to know what she was doing. She ignored him. 20 feet back, she found a new position. It wasn't perfect. The angle was worse, the distance was greater, the cover was minimal, but it was safe. She settled into position, recalculated the shot in her head, and found the target again through her scope. He was turning to leave the roof. She had seconds. Sarah made the adjustment for the new angle, compensated for the increased distance, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked, the bullet flew, and 1,642 yards away, Ali Hassan al-Bakr dropped to the roof, dead before he hit the ground. "Confirmed kill," David said, his voice filled with amazement. "Target is down, how did you?" But Sarah was already moving. She slung her rifle and ran toward the secondary observation post, her pistol drawn. She covered the distance in seconds, adrenaline flooding her system. When she reached the position, she found two operators looking confused. Neither of them was Reeves. "Where is he?" Sarah demanded. One of the operators pointed down the mountain. "He said he needed to check something, took off about 5 minutes ago." Sarah ran in that direction and found Reeves crouched behind a rock, holding a small electronic device. When he saw her, his face went white. "Sarah, I can explain." "You tried to kill me," Sarah said, her pistol trained on his chest. "You put an IED under my shooting position." "It wasn't supposed to actually explode," Reeves shouted. "It was just supposed to scare you, make you miss the shot, prove that you choke under pressure." "By almost blowing me up." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You're insane." "I'm trying to protect this team," Reeves yelled. "You don't belong here. Women don't belong in the SEALs. I was trying to prove that before you got someone killed." Other team members were arriving now, drawn by the shouting. Sarah saw Hutchins approaching, his weapon drawn, his face a mask of fury. "Lieutenant Reeves," Hutchins said in a voice like ice, "put down the detonator and place your hands on your head. Do it now." For a moment, Sarah thought Reeves might actually trigger the device. She could see him weighing his options. But finally, his shoulders slumped and he set the detonator on the ground. "It was just supposed to scare her," he repeated quietly as Hutchins and another operator secured him with zip ties. "I wasn't going to let it actually explode. I just wanted to prove she didn't belong." "Instead, you proved that you don't belong," Hutchins said coldly. He looked at Sarah, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw something like respect in his eyes. "Master Chief, are you all right?" Sarah nodded, holstering her pistol. "Yes, sir, and the target is down." "Despite everything," Hutchins said quietly, "despite nearly being killed by one of your own teammates, you still made the shot." "It's what I'm trained to do, sir," Sarah replied simply. The extraction was tense and quiet. EOD specialists confirmed that the device Reeves had planted was indeed an explosive, though it was small enough that it probably wouldn't have killed Sarah, just injured her badly enough to end her career. Reeves was taken into custody and would face court-martial for attempted murder and a dozen other charges. The story broke 2 days later. This time, the headlines weren't about the woman who made the impossible shot. They were about the Navy SEAL who had been targeted by her own teammate because of his prejudice. They were about the broken culture that had allowed someone like Reeves to think violence was an acceptable response to a woman succeeding where he had failed. It started a conversation that the Navy didn't want to have, but they had to have it anyway. Sarah was called to testify at Reeves's court-martial. It was one of the hardest things she had ever done, not because she was afraid, but because she had to relive that moment when she realized someone she had trusted with her life had tried to kill her. Reeves was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to 20 years in a military prison and was dishonorably discharged. The verdict sent a message throughout the special operations community. Prejudice would not be tolerated. Violence against fellow operators would not be tolerated. The old guard was changing, whether they liked it or not. But for Sarah, the verdict was bittersweet. She had won, but the cost had been high. She would never again be able to completely trust the people around her on a mission. She would always wonder if someone resented her, if someone thought she didn't belong, if someone might decide to prove a point by putting her in danger. Captain Morrison called her in for a meeting the week after the court-martial ended. Sarah expected another offer to transfer, another suggestion that she consider moving to a training role where she wouldn't face this kind of hatred. Instead, Morrison surprised her. "The Navy is creating a new unit," Morrison said. "A specialized sniper team that will handle the most difficult long-range operations. They want the best shooters from all the branches, SEALs, Marines, Rangers, people who can make shots others can't even imagine." She slid a folder across the desk. "They want you to lead it." Sarah opened the folder and scanned the documents. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, a chance to work with elite operators who valued skill over gender, who cared about results rather than politics. "What about the people who don't want women in combat roles?" Sarah asked. "What happens when I run into another Reeves?" Morrison smiled grimly. "Then you document it, report it, and let the system deal with it. That's how change happens. Not overnight, but gradually, as people like you prove that the old attitudes don't work anymore." Sarah thought about everything she had been through. The insults, the sabotage. The moment she had realized someone wanted her dead, she thought about how much easier it would be to walk away, to find a comfortable position where people wouldn't challenge her every day. Then she thought about the girls who would come after her. The young women who would decide to join the military because they had seen Sarah Chen prove that women could do anything men could do. The next generation who wouldn't have to fight as hard because Sarah had fought first. "When do I start?" Sarah asked. Morrison's smile widened. "That's my girl." 6 months later, Sarah stood on a shooting range in Virginia, watching a class of new sniper candidates run through their qualifications. Half of them were women. All of them were there because they had earned it. Jessica Park, who had left her intelligence role to become Sarah's second-in-command, stood beside her. "Can you believe this?" Jessica asked. "A year ago, you were the only woman in the room. Now look at this." Sarah watched as one of the female candidates made a perfect shot at 800 yards. The instructor, a former Marine raider who had initially been skeptical about training women, gave a grunt of approval and marked the shot as excellent. "It's a start," Sarah said. "There's still a long way to go." "But it's progress," Jessica pointed out. "Real progress, that's because of you." Sarah shook her head. "It's because of all of us. Every woman who refuses to quit, every woman who makes the impossible shot, every woman who proves that we belong." That evening, Sarah received an encrypted message on her secure phone. It was from David Kim, who was still working with the SEAL teams at Coronado. "Thought you'd want to know," the message read. "Commander Hutchins put you in for the Medal of Honor for the Yemen mission. Said it was the most extraordinary act of valor he'd ever witnessed, making a kill shot under extreme duress while literally having a bomb under your position. Figured you should hear it from a friend before it goes public." Sarah read the message twice, then set her phone down. The Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration, given to fewer than 4,000 people in American history, and never before to a female sniper. She thought about that teenage girl in California who had first picked up a rifle and discovered she had a talent for shooting. She thought about all the people who had told her she would never make it. She thought about Marcus Reeves in his prison cell, probably still believing he had been right. And she thought about the shot she had made in Yemen, the impossible shot, taken from an improvised position under the worst kind of pressure imaginable. The shot that proved once and for all that Sarah Chen wasn't just as good as the men she served with. She was better, Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Captain Morrison. "Heard about the Medal of Honor," Morrison's message read. "You deserve it, but more importantly, you've earned something better, the right to be judged on your skills instead of your gender. Use that well." Sarah smiled and typed back, "Roger that." Outside, the sun was setting over the Virginia hills. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, new opportunities to prove herself. But for now, in this moment, Sarah Chen allowed herself to simply exist as what she was, one of the best snipers in the world, regardless of gender. And somewhere in Syria, in a compound that had once housed a terrorist, there was a concrete wall with a bullet hole that told a story. The story of a shot that was supposed to be impossible. The story of a woman who refused to accept limitations. The story of how determination, skill, and courage could overcome prejudice. The SEAL commander had said that target was untouchable. And then she took the shot through a concrete wall. Not because she was trying to prove something to anyone else, but because it was her job, and she was the best person to do it.